Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and thank you for tuning in to another video. So we've already done a few where to starts. We've done the X-Men, we've done DC Comics, we've even done the Power Rangers, but I was thinking to myself, when I was getting into comics, who were some of the characters that I really wanted to start reading but I didn't have a clue where I could begin? Because admittedly, that's what this entire series has been about from day one. It isn't for the seasoned comic reader who's looking for a hidden gem that they might have forgotten about. This is for the people that maybe haven't even brought a single comic in their life. That's when I realised that the answer has been staring me in the face the entire time, because the biggest comic book character, to me at least, I believe, is the Dark Knight himself, Batman. Sure, yes, there's been characters over the years that have come by and questioned his popularity, but for me, I think he is one of the staple comic book characters who's responsible for getting a lot of readers into this medium. Me included, Batman was one of the first characters that I started reading, and when I think back, it wasn't really too easy to know exactly what books I should read, so although there's probably some of you dogs out there who are watching this video and maybe already know a lot about Batman, and you've maybe even read more than me already, this is for those people who want to start reading the Caped Crusader and they just don't have a clue where they can begin. You might not agree with every pick on here, but this is my own personal list, and I was thinking to myself that if I went back in time, what are the Batman books that I would ask myself to read? And I'd probably try and talk myself out of going university, but here we are. So the first book that I'm going to pick is probably an obvious pick if you've been reading comics for some time, because it's Frank Miller's Batman Year One. I'm putting this one forward over The Dark Knight Returns because that's another one that I know gets recommended quite a bit, but for a new reader, maybe somebody who's never read a comic before, I don't really think TDKR is the best pick. Instead, I'd go with Batman Year One, and if you haven't read any comics before, Year One is always a good indication that it's something that you can just jump into. It is the origin story, but it's told in a more mature way rather than the way it would have been told in the 1920s. So you see Bruce Wayne with a lot of anger behind him, he's quite rusty in the role and he doesn't know what he's doing a lot of the time. Gotham is also a lot grimier, and I like the way that they integrated Commissioner Gordon's story into this, so effectively you get an origin story for both of those characters. As well, the David Mazzucchelli art is phenomenal, I can't really fault it. There's so many images throughout this book that I read when I was about 12 or so that still stick in my mind today. But for an introduction into both Batman and Gotham City as a whole, I don't really think you can do much better than Batman Year One. Second up, we've got one of my favourite stories of all time, and that is Batman Hush. I think this might have actually been my first ever Batman story. I had this recommended to me, and when you look at it on the surface, you may think that this isn't a great introduction into this universe because all the characters and all the villains are just thrown at you. But speaking from personal experience, I enjoyed the art and the story so much that it made me want to invest in this universe and research into the characters that I'd seen. For that reason alone, Batman Hush probably was the best introductory Batman story that I could have had, because of the fact that it does show you Huntress, and it shows you the Batman Rogues Gallery, and it shows you the Batcave with all the weird stuff that's in it, like that giant coin and the dinosaur, and it makes you want to find out about those elements rather than babysitting you and spoon feeding you all the information. Although yes, I do admit that Where to Start is a series that was meant for people who have no knowledge of these characters. I think sometimes jumping into a story that does have them all already established and just sort of expects you to find out the information as you go along can actually introduce you into the world a lot better. And as well, there's no way I can talk about Hush without talking about that phenomenal Jim Lee art. The lines are so crisp and it's got so many splash pages. It's got a fight between Batman and Superman that you just don't want to end. It's exciting and it does delve into the mythology of Batman a little bit, even if there are some stuff that needs to be retconned later on. So personally, if you are looking for a beautiful, entertaining and engaging Batman story, Hush might be the best way for you to go. Next up, and if you were a fan of the Dark Knight movie that came out over 12 years ago, I would definitely recommend to you that you read Batman the Long Halloween. This is from the creative team of Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, and they did other Batman stories as well that I'd recommend, like Catwoman When in Rome, they did Batman the Haunted Knight and Batman Dark Victory, all of which are great, but if you want a story that deals with the Dark Knight confronting the Mafia and it doesn't really have too many of those, whimsical, mystical elements in it, I would recommend Batman the Long Halloween. You even get stuff like the Joker being incorporated and Poison Ivy in a way that doesn't feel gimmicky, and it still keeps its roots with the Mafia storyline that it's telling you. You get introduced to Harvey Dent and you get his storyline as he becomes Two-Face, and there is a lot of integration with the Gotham Police Department, corruption within it, and Jim Gordon being a part of the story. It's also a comic that doesn't expect you to know the history of Batman, but all you really need to know is his origins, and it takes it from there. As well, Tim Sale has a style that doesn't really fit in the realms of traditional comic art, so if you're looking for something a little bit different, maybe something that you're not really going to see in too many other places. This will give you a really different look into Gotham. The way he draws stuff is very angular, but it's also beautiful at the same time, and you get to see a different side of Gotham because this takes place throughout the year. So you get to see it Christmas when it's snowy, and you get to see it during Halloween, and I just think that the way that they present the story is very new reader friendly. But at the same time, if you're a seasoned Batman reader, there's still something in here that you could enjoy. My fourth pick is where I'm going to start cheating because I've got Batman the Animated Series. This was the first exposure to Batman that I properly had because the films looked a bit too dark for my mum to want to show them to me. But Batman the Animated Series will introduce you to all of these characters, and some of them will already be established at the point where you start watching the show. If you just want a rudimentary understanding, but at the same point you want to understand the depths of some of these characters, Batman the Animated Series made a point of really elaborating on who these characters are. And if you're a Harley Quinn fan, this was actually the origin story for that character. So much about Batman that we already love and appreciate came as a result of this animated series. It was groundbreaking for the time, and I'm rewatching it at the minute, and the art style is still phenomenal. Effectively, each episode works as its own story. So say for example you wanted to learn more about Mr. Freeze, you could just jump into those episodes, and as long as you've got some basic understanding of who Batman is as a character and some of the people within Gotham, you're going to be fine, and you're going to be able to just continue from there. So although yes, it isn't really a comic, a lot of people found their roots within Batman by watching the animated series. Maybe it's the case that you don't want to take the plunge into reading comics just yet, and you want to learn more about these characters, so you could watch the animated series, and then you could actually read one of the books that I've recommended with a better understanding than if you were just going into it blind. Like a bat. You need to stop with these shit jokes, Marcus. Number 5, and this is where I'm saying that this is my personal list for stories that worked for me. I've got Batman Murderer Fugitive. Parts of it were also known as Bruce Wayne Murderer Fugitive, so you know, look out for that. I believe it was being released in the late 90s, and it was Chuck Dixon that did it for the most part, but you get to delve into the other Batman titles as well. So you've got Detective Comics, and some of the Bat Family books tie into this. You also get quite an interesting story that deals with the duality of Batman and Bruce Wayne. You get to see what he's like when he's the prey for once, rather than it being the case that he's always the one stalking the criminals. And weirdly, this was one of the first Batman books that I read because of the fact that it was in my school library. I remember sitting and reading the majority of it in one day because of the fact that we didn't really have that many comics to begin with. So if it worked for me back then, and I remember enjoying it and the story seemed decent, this is one that I'm going to put on the list. Number 6, we've got a crossover title with Superman Batman. Now yeah, up till now I've been saying that, oh, this was one of the first Batman books that I read, oh, this was one of the first Batman media that I read. But Superman Batman was actually one of the first comics that I ever read, and I remember reading it online. I'm not sure why I gravitated towards this one, but it was Superman, it was Batman, and for me, that just made me want to read on. And for the first part of this story that's written entirely by Jeff Loeb, you probably won't find much better. And for at least the first part of this story that was written by Jeff Loeb, it's really enjoyable and it's got a great array of artists. So for starters, you've got Ed McGuinness and Michael Turner, but the reason why I think this is great is because it reminds you of why exactly you're reading comics, and it is because of the fact that they're just dumb fun. So the first arc in particular, you see Lex Luthor assembling an array of D-list supervillains, and then the second arc is a Supergirl story. So it keeps that excitement going throughout, but at the same time Superman still acts like Superman and Batman still acts like Batman. So it may be the case that you're one of the few people who has read Superman before but you've never read Batman and you're wondering how you can cross over. The best way to do that for me would be to read the Jeff Loeb part of Superman Batman. This still brings back so many good memories for me, and hopefully if you're looking to get into Batman, this is one of those stories that will have the same effect for you. My next pick is one of the most recent ones that's going to make it onto this list, and it's Batman the White Knight by Sean Murphy. Sean Murphy's got a really unique style that I've talked about before in my Tokyo Ghost review, but at the same time this is effectively an Elseworlds tale because it's underneath the DC Black label. And maybe it's the case that you've watched that Joaquin Phoenix Joker film and you want to know how you can get some more Batman fix as a result of that. One of my recommendations for you would be Batman the White Knight, and you might be watching this thinking it's blasphemous that I'm not saying something like Batman the Killing Joke, but I think for me Batman the Killing Joke works much better when you've already got an understanding of who these characters are. Batman the White Knight does take for granted that you understand the dynamic between Batman and the Joker, because what Batman the White Knight does is takes the Joker and it cures him of his insanity, and then he starts running as a political figure within Gotham. It really gives you a unique look at the relationship between the Joker and the Caped Crusader, and I think for somebody who's getting into comics, it's nice to have these sort of Elseworld style tales that are off the beaten track. You don't need all that continuity, but at the same time it gives you great art and it does give you a great insight into the characters. characters. So although it's not going to help you into jumping into recent single issues of Batman, I do still think it's going to give you a really good modern story. Next up may seem like an obscure pick for a list for where to start on Batman, but I've got Batman TMNT. There's been 3 series of this already, and the first one was one that I absolutely loved. It's also written by James Tynion IV, who's the writer of Batman at the moment, so if you really enjoy this, maybe you're somebody that loves the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, maybe that's what you watched when you were growing up, and now that you're a bit older, you want to get into reading Batman, but you don't have that accessible character that can help you cross over. The Ninja Turtles crossover story works really well because of the fact that you get to see Batman interacting as himself with characters that are really obscure and probably don't belong in his universe. So this is getting the nod for me because I think with those characters that you might already know, with Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello and Raphael, you can sort of leapfrog off them so that you can then start reading Batman because you understand the relationship as an effect of these characters that you already know. And then if you like the writing style, you can jump into one of the most recent Rebirth series that's also written by the same writer. And more than that, this series is just good fun. So I think the most important thing when you're recommending comics to someone new is that you give them stories that they're more than likely going to enjoy. If you give them something that's really heavy and overly intellectual just for the sake of being intellectual, they might end up not reading any other comics as a result. For me, especially when you're starting out, always make sure that you have fun with the book. So for me, I don't think you're going to get more fun than if it's got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles involved. Now, you knew this next pick was coming up because it's Batman New 52 by Scott Snyder. Yeah, you could argue that Batman Black Mirror would be a good pick for this series as well, but I think for me, you do need to know some continuity as a result, you know, with what happened with Bruce Wayne. But the New 52 series was made for new readers, and it was where I jumped in on single issues on Batman, because a lot of the stories that I've recommended so far are quite contained, finite series, but with the New 52 run, you're going to get a complete beginning, middle and end. But the New 52 understood that people were entering comics and didn't really know where to begin, and they put one of the best writers that you can have in Scott Snyder on the series. You had fantastic art from Greg Capullo as well, and like I said, you get quintessential Joker stories. Commissioner Gordon has a really good stride in it, and as well there are some good crossovers with other Bat family books that can then help you to expand into those stories. Another that I'd recommend is Batman and Robin by Peter J. Tomasi. Now maybe you want the Caped Crusader and the Boy Wonder to be working together, and that's the one that I'd probably recommend if you want the long strand story again. It's really fun, really vibrant, and I feel like Tomasi is one of those writers that understands that people might be reading his issue as the first issue that they've ever read, but he also sort of understands that there's fans that have been reading for years that just want to continue the story that they've been reading. He's one of those writers that can actually balance those two, so it might be the case that you read that and then already feel like you know way more about Batman than you should for just reading one story. Full disclaimer, I'm still yet to finish this series because I was reading it in single issues at the time and then I stopped collecting them, but from what I did read, I really enjoyed Tomasi's run on Batman and Robin. Now, to continue the controversial picks, I've got Batman No Man's Land. The reason why I am recommending this is because this was like the third Batman story that I ever read, and it's really fucking good as a learning experience, because effectively, if you've watched The Dark Knight Rises, you already mostly know the plot of Batman No Man's Land. All the bridges to Gotham have been blown up, and Gotham is now encased in its own city. No one can leave and no one can enter. So you see all these different factions, like the Joker's got his own team, you've got the Penguin running a different part of Gotham, and it sounds like it might be crap because there's too much stuff going on there for it to be an enjoyable story, but weirdly, Batman No Man's Land just worked. Now, I'm not going to be quick to recommend something like Batman Nightfall or Batman War Crimes or something like that, but for me, I think the way that they integrated characters and the way that it made you want to investigate them further really reminded me of how people talked about like 60s Marvel comics. Now, when you think about it, near enough every single issue from that age of Marvel was a good entry point for a new reader, but at the same time, in a Spider-Man book, you could see Thor flying past and you'd want to know who that character is. For me, I think that's part of the enjoyment of comics, and I think it's what a lot of people forget when they're recommending stories to new readers. Why not have a book where you don't understand who everybody is, but you can easily find a way to learn? We are now in a better position in this day and age than people were in that age in the 60s with Marvel, so why can't it be the case that you read a story like Batman No Man's Land, see a character like Huntress or Cassandra Cain, and then discover who they are as a result of that? So although yes, I can understand that people might say that this one isn't new reader friendly, for me, I think it actually very much is, because of the fact that you're going to get exposed to this universe. And again, similar to what I said with Hush, you're not really going to be babysat. Like, this storyline I think went on for a year and there were tons of issues, but each one was great. There was a storyline where Batman was on a roof and two people were arguing over a baby, and then he said that he was going to cut it in half just to see who the real mother was. You get great little stories like that, but then you get great character defining moments like with what happened with Commissioner Gordon. So for me, yes, there is going to be a bit of a learning curve if this is one of the first Batman stories that you read, but I think it's going to be a learning curve that's going to pay off for you in the long run if you do really want to get into this universe. And in a similar way, my penultimate recommendation is going to be JLA Tower of Babel. But again, similar to how I recommended Superman Batman, it might be the case that you know other characters within the Justice League, but somehow don't know who Batman is. I know that's highly unlikely, but in this list I'm trying to cater for as many people as I can. But the reason why I think this JLA book works great as a Batman title is because of the fact that you get to see how other characters see Batman. The plot of this is that members of the Justice League are being taken out, and it comes back to the fact that Batman's been keeping files on all of the Justice League in case it was ever the case that he had to initiate a counterattack against them. So you get to see the fact that Batman doesn't ever really trust anyone, despite the fact that he's part of this team and he's been working with them for years. It's kind of positioned in a way to make Batman look like a villain, and it makes you question the way you feel about him as a character. Having stories like this really enrich what you think about certain figures within the DC universe, so that's the reason why I'm going to recommend it on here. Fortunately, it is getting a new deluxe edition next year, which I can't wait to buy. It's been years since I've read this one, and I really just want to sit back now that I know more about the Justice League itself, and read this story again. But maybe you're the reverse and you know about the Justice League, and now you can read this and learn more about Batman. But my last pick is going to be a bit of a generalised one, but I've just put Bat Family books. It's okay to not want to just jump into Batman straight away, but you could read something like Batgirl Year 1 and learn about Batman through that. You could also read like the Chuck Dixon Robin run, or maybe the Gail Simone Birds of Prey run, or maybe something like Grayson, and all of those books will have some kind of reference to Batman, and you can see how other characters look at him. Another great one that I'd be stupid to not recommend in this would be Gotham Central. Maybe you've mainly read independent books and you've never really read anything from the big two publishers before, but I think something like Gotham Central would still introduce you into the Batman universe, and you still get to see him on occasion, because you are getting a police detective story that spans Gotham as an entire city, but Batman, the Bat Family, and some of his rogues gallery crop up throughout this story and really introduce you well into who these characters are without it kind of overloading you with information. And I think the main thing with doing any kind of list like this is that you always find a story that interests you. I could recommend you Batman Hush because it's one of my favourite Batman stories, but you might read it and think that it's not a great story. That's fine. The important thing is that you read stories that interest you enough to keep you in this hobby. And no matter who you are, no matter what your experience is with comics before, I think there's going to be at least one book on this list that's going to interest you even a little bit. But those are all my picks, and like I said, hopefully there is something that helps you get into reading Batman. People might have other recommendations. Like I said, this was my personal list of stories that really worked for me and helped build my knowledge. But I would like to know what Batman books you'd recommend. Alternatively, what was the first Batman story that you read? Leave it in the comment section below and we can discuss it further there. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't like this video, why did you get this far? Please subscribe if you haven't done so already and become a part of the Dog Pound. I can't believe how close we are to 1,000 subscribers, and I still don't have a clue what I'd do if we ever reach that number. But I do also have my social media links up there. I try to put as much comic content on there as I can, and if you do want to support the channel, maybe you want to buy one of these Batman books, it is greatly appreciated. I'm not just going to straight up ask for your money in like a donation or a Patreon or anything like that, but I do just ask that you treat yourself to a book with your money, but use one of the Amazon affiliate links below. I can't see any of your details. It doesn't affect the price. It just means that eventually I can finally upgrade this camera. But that's the video, and hopefully you enjoyed it. But until the next one, just make sure that you stay safe, keep reading, and keep barking all you mad dogs, and I'll see you at the next video.